As Mrs. Pankhurst said, enough's enough. Chained to railing, she would do a step.
How can the feminism of the 1970s evolve to deal with 21st century sexists? The actress Natasha McElhone, the historian Mary Beard and journalist Angela Epstein have some suggestions. Now, what do you think of when you hear the word feminism? Women out on the streets marching for equal pay, talking about domestic violence, academics debating just exactly which wave of the movement we're now on, or something scarily earnest, a little humorless perhaps, that's the subject of town hall talks. Well, it might be time to think again. A new movement online is challenging the stereotypes, fighting new ground. Here's Fee Glover with the Digital Feminists.
Pause for reflection. In that teeny mirror on that weeny shoulder. It lets you know at a glance, girls, who's glancing. And it might save a biff in the back from a bus. That young man, by the way, seems to prefer to be heard and not seen.
Oh, how times have changed. Of course, the modern woman doesn't really need a wing mirror on her shoulder in order to report back on the world around her, because she's got one of these in her teeny-weeny hand, and with it she can tweet, she can email, she can blog, she can sign campaigns for change, she can like it, she can tell the world how she feels.
I noticed after perhaps a stop or two that he was getting aroused.
And then eventually he started stroking my leg, and I told him to stop.
And it wasn't till I got to work that I found semen down the back of my legs.
The Everyday Sexism Project is a website launched last year by Laura Bates, who wanted to create a place where individuals could report their own experiences of sexism.
Just to look at some recent entries, a man more than twice my age thought it appropriate to tell me I'm well developed for a 16-year-old in a good way. Patient at work said, I don't want to see some uneducated woman, I want to see a real doctor. Guy on the bus throwing things at me because I ignored his request to sit on his lap. I was groped between my legs in a club and had a man masturbate whilst telling me he wanted to suck on my tits in the street in broad daylight. What's important to say is that a lot of people who write into us specify the fact that they feel absolutely frozen, ashamed, embarrassed. Those are very common reactions when that kind of harassment happens. So I don't think it's the case that if they didn't write to Everyday Sexism, they would otherwise say something back. I think they had been silenced for a long time.
These stories haven't stayed in the digital world. Some were used by police in a campaign on London transport, resulting in increased reporting of sexual offences and increased detection rates too.
These are still early days for assessing the impact of that heady combo of individual power and its ability to shift entrenched positions. One of those being the mainstream media's obsession with breasts.
Perhaps you saw this, courtesy of the Daily Mail. When performance artist Amanda Palmer appeared at Glastonbury this summer, she accidentally revealed one bosom to the crowd. Her subsequent song about how that bosom became the story, not her art, went viral.
Dear Daily Mail, it has come to my recent attention that my recent appearance at Glastonbury festivals kindly received a mention.
The beautiful thing about new media and YouTube and Twitter is that you're sharing all of these experiences in real time and you're kind of relying on each other. By the time I got home that night, someone had already uploaded the video to YouTube. I took a look at it, shared it, and then by the next morning it had gone viral.
Do you ever sense that there's a friction between the different generations of feminism?
This generation is programmed to want to share forward what resonates with them and what makes them feel more human. And in that, I think you might see the seeds of a real change and a real evolution, because, you know, even 10 or 15 years ago, if I wanted to make a statement about something that was bothering me, I was stuck talking to my friends or calling up the old media, and now I can say it directly, and that's going to change the world. It already has.
Come and join us!
Stubborn, hard to shift inequalities remain. It's the same old song, isn't it?
As Mrs. Pankhurst said, enough's enough. Chained to
Modern feminism reflects modern society. If a criticism of previous waves of the movement was that the voice of feminism was often white, well-off and academic, that's not the case now. The visual exploitation of women goes hand in hand with the digital age. More images, easier to see, easier to share. It's one of the modern feminists' biggest battles.
I can pay for everything that's on you, so everything is on me. Got them girls going Cindy Lauper, Gaga and a little blondie.
So this video, Calvin Harris featuring Tiny Temper, drinking from the bottle. In terms of the sexualisation of black women were not a part of the plot of the video. They're just shaking it on the car. You don't even see their faces or anything, they're literally just bums.
Ikamara Larasai is part of the Rewind and Reframe project, a one-stop shop website that will allow users to send their comments direct to record labels and the regulator. I asked her how she felt when she watches the way young black women are portrayed in music videos.
Bored and frustrated. The fact that this image is a normal depiction of people like me is a problem. And that's the thing that people that don't know people like me are absorbing.
Is there a danger, though, that people feel too powerful with the digital experience? You know, you tweet something or you send an email via your website and you think, you know, I've really packed a punch there.
I think it's useful to feel like you've contributed to making a difference on a particular issue and it wasn't too strenuous and you didn't have to get wet in the rain. I think that's the good thing about digital campaigns.
Not everyone believes that the new digital world will allow feminism to achieve its goals. Charlotte Raven is the editor of The Feminist Times. She's just launched it digitally, but wants it to become a stimulus for meeting up and discussing ideas.
When I read Everyday Sexism, I'm usually on my own. Often when I put the kids to bed, I find myself drawn to it, and there's a process of a kind of feeling of it's such a depressing litany of horror, and yet you feel impotent in relation to it. There's nothing you can do about it. The only way that change can be affected is in 3 dimensions, by meeting up with real people who are going to change your mind and also change the world.
Digital feminism has an ability to throw a cause around the world in seconds, and you can feel that you are creating a loud new noise. But the question is, how many people are listening?
Just try and answer that. We're joined now to discuss the F word with the actress Natasha McElhone, the journalist Angela Epstein, and the historian classicist Mary Beard. Thanks all very much for coming in. And let's start with the real basics first of all. Mary Beard, would you define yourself using the word feminist?
Of course I would.
Without even thinking twice?
Absolutely, no question. That's what I am, that's what I stand for. I think feminism comes in various forms. I don't think that, you can't lump everybody together. And yet, the bottom line is that I can't understand a woman in this country that isn't.
Natasha McElhone, would you say anything different?
I guess what I'd say is that I think feminism's an easy word for people to reject, and the sorts of people that I'd probably like to tune in more to the issue and to be more conscious of how they are around women and how women are towards themselves. It's very, very easy for feminism to start to mean something that's sort of akin to a political class that's in opposition to men, and so therefore people will feel defensive around that word. And I want that not to happen. I want to work together with men, and I'm interested in equality rather than the idea that some people might have, exactly, of a superior...
Angela Epstein, are you comfortable with the term feminist, would you call yourself?
Absolutely not. I definitely wouldn't call myself a feminist. I think part of the reason is because all the great battles upon which feminism, the suffrage movement originally were established have long since been fought and fought successfully. More women go to university now than men. Girls routinely outplay boys in the classroom. Women have made an impact in all aspects of professional life. I mean, look at the glorious selection we have here on Newsnight tonight.
So that stops you ever using the word feminist yourself?
So what I was about to say is, so what's evolved now is a kind of artificial engineering, a kind of construct, because all those great battles have been fought. What feminists are now often looking for, they're spoiling for a fight. They sort of seize upon petty grievances, which I think denude and offend the original principles of feminism. So, for example, we're talking about digital activism and all the hashtag sisters that come out crying in force. Yes, if there's a huge social grievance, absolutely, digital media is very, very efficient in doing that. But look at the campaign to get women on banknotes. Does it really matter whether Jane Austen's on the banknotes or not?
Natasha, do you agree the battles have been won?
Well, clearly not, because we're having this discussion. And I think what's new compared to 30 years ago is that it's more insidious. Now, we're not talking about female genital mutilation. We're not talking about child, 8-year-olds marrying 40-year-olds as they do in other parts of the world. Today here, in sort of my life and in my circle of people that I mix with, something that's become terribly commonplace is how sort of internalised, I'd even go as far to say a kind of misogyny has become, that I don't think was prevalent when I was growing up and for my mother's generation.
Mary Beard, you were most recently the victim of trolling, online digital misogyny, and your response to that, when I read, I thought it was quite calm, it was quite unemotional, almost like you didn't want to sound hysterical about it.
Look, I'm not on a rant, and I'm not picking a fight, and for me, feminism isn't about picking a fight. I'm much more than Natasha. But it seems to me that I had a lot of trouble with online trolling, and it was clear that I'm 58, I'm quite tough, I've been around, and I don't feel very bullyable. And yet there were a lot of women who were getting much what I was getting, who are actually afraid to go out of their houses because people were going through onto their Twitter feed saying, "We're watching you outside."
So what would be your response to Angela, who's just told us that the battles have been won and that the battles are now minor ones?
I think that, of course, there's been enormous changes. There's a legislative framework which wasn't true in my mother's generation for equal pay, equal rights and so forth. In some ways, I think we've done extremely well and we should be patting ourselves on the back. But it is also absolutely clear that you only have to look at everyday sexism to see the kind of stuff that is said about women day by day. I think it's very easy to say of those things, look, they're terribly trivial. Haven't you got a sense of humour?
Let's bring them up, Mary, because you've mentioned them, and we've had a sort of tie-in today. Our hashtag, for those of you following on Twitter, is hashtag #NNSexism, which is tied into everyday sexism. And if we can bring up some of the comments that have been posted, we might be able to get you there. Iola, age 14, doing the paper round in school uniform when a car of older guys start catcalling, tooting, shouting at me. Andrea, is that trivial? And should it be something she just waves away?
No, she shouldn't. She shouldn't wave it away. I mean, I'd be concerned about a 14-year-old taking on a carload of older guys. If she felt harassed, if any woman feels harassed, if she feels that she's the victim of sexism or sexual objectification, yes, there are resources and ways to report that and deal with that. The problem with sites like Everyday Sexism is you have, on the one hand, some deeply unpleasant tweets, as we saw just before in the film, about the woman that was approached in the nightclub. I mean, that's harassment. That's an issue for the law enforcement authorities. And then you have people going on saying they're complaining because they were called Blossom in the office workplace.
Let's have a look.
Everything is lumped together.
You put that.
Nothing divisive.
You mentioned Blossom. I think there is one that mentions flower. I think it is. I don't know if we can bring up whoever said that. Laura said, being called flower by a BT salesman coming into my work to flog the man in charge cheaper broadband. this is the problem, isn't it? How do you react to that? Do you cast it aside, or do you risk being called humourless, or do you take it to a tribunal? You know, I mean, not this one, but these kind of examples. Natasha?
I think the really important point is that women aren't being represented for what they are actually doing and contributing in society. That's my main bugbear, is the objectification. What we see mostly represented around us of women are very objectified, I would say, sort of, you know, that they're pornographic images on the front covers of magazines and on billboards and so forth. That's largely how women are physically represented. And my interest was in sort of doing, you know, a sort of thought reversal of, if that was men who were being represented in that way, how would they feel, and how would we as women respond to that?
But some women get empowered by that. I mean, if you look at the fact, yes, if we look at the typical page 3 girl, yes, that's sexual objectification. But I think as a society we should balk at that. It's not a women's issue. I don't want my kids to look at that when they're having their Cocoa Pops. But by the same token, you can get a woman who feels empowered, professionally successful, who goes on a beach in Ibiza and takes a top off and sunbathes topless.
No.
What's the difference between that? She objectifies herself.
But Emily's question, in a sense, was what should we do about these kind of tweets, the things that are coming up through everyday sexism? And I think, you know, the answer is there's lots of things to do. You can ridicule them, you can complain about them, you can actually giggle at the silly blokes who are saying this. But I think there is, individually, there's all sorts of responses. But I think what this website shows is it's the aggregate of this stuff. It's not, you know, somebody individually calling you Blossom.
It is, but it's talking to itself, isn't it? I mean, the people who look on this website are not the blokes, presumably, that are being discussed.
No, that's not the point, though. And I think the issue is, you know, one of the questions that we're still asking ourselves is, why are there relatively few women in public life? Why are there relatively few women at the top of industry? Why is women's success above the glass ceiling so limited? Well, one of the answers might be is because actually, when we go out, the kind of stuff we get delivered to us is this kind of crap.
OK, so the question is, on a practical level, yes, it's great that you've got this aggregate of voices and people going onto a site to post it, but if it was something more than that, if they took it to the outside world, I mean, would you like to see more practical endeavours rather than just sort of, you know, going online and getting it off your chest? Do you think there should be quotas? Do you think there should be
go out
solutions?
Sometimes.
And there's a lot of knee-jerk, push-button reaction that goes on. The thing about digital media is we can all be very brave when we're cyber warriors, and we don't have to stand outside Downing Street with a petition. And also, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Somebody starts a petition online saying women shouldn't be called flower,
sure,
and it gathers a momentum
so, Natasha,
all of its own.
What would you suggest in terms of a prescription? That's a dangerous word to use, isn't it? But what would you do in terms of practical change?
I actually think it's much simpler than we imagine. I mean, I think, for example, small things, and again, people think this is very archaic and old-fashioned and ridiculous, but things like children's toys, I think it starts when kids go to play school, and this notion that there are princesses and then there are knights that rescue the princesses. And a school book day of my kids the other day, a bunch of 4 or 5-year-olds, I counted one girl in the class
who was
not a princess. Now, there just aren't that many. What's so terrible?
I mean, I've got boys and a girl. You know, my little girl will play with the boy stuff if she wants to, or she'll go through the princess moment if she wants to. You know, we're biologically wired to be
her choices.
Well, yes,
no.
She's offering herself choices. She's empowered by the choice of dolls and footballs that exist in the house.
Why do so many girls, and I think it's a majority, rather tragically, I don't know the exact figure, when there was a survey done for little schoolgirls under the age of 9 who were asked what they wanted to be when they were adults, they wanted to be a wag. They wanted to be a footballer's wife. That was the aspiration.
Jamie Barton, interestingly enough, had very interesting things to say on that last week, but maybe that's for another discussion. Thank you all very much indeed. I'm so sorry we've run out of time then.